What is the correct order of the signal chain of your mix bus? Let's get into it. Hey everyone, I'm Cool Caparoon. Thank you for stopping by for another video. Now, in my last video going over my mix bus, all the gear that's on my mix bus, I'll link that video down below. You should go watch it because it's fun. It's a fun one. But when I got to my signature pre's here and I started talking about using them for saturation, and I got to the Rupert Neve Designs MBT or the SSL Fusion, and I was discussing where I put them in my signal chain, there were so many people, so many comments that were like, wait, you don't put your signature pre's at the top of your mix bus, it's almost at the end. Now in that video, I listed out my hardware mix bus chain, and I also gave plugin examples of the plugins I would suggest using in replacement for all of this hardware. So if you want to go see what I used on my mix bus and go do that, I'll put links down below. I'll also put links down below for every piece in my mix bus and all the plugins that I recommend using and all of the videos, the dedicated videos on every piece of gear. Now, actually, this is not just about mix bus. This applies to literally everything, your vocal chain, your drum bus, your kick drum chain, like literally everything will follow all these exact same principles no matter what. So how do you know whether to put EQ first or saturation before compression or EQ after compression? Which order of your signal chain should you use in your productions on your mix bus and whatever else? Now let me preface this whole video by saying if you ever hear anyone say that you should only put compression before EQ or you should only put saturation after compression or whatever, if you hear someone make a blanket statement like that, you should just stop listening to them immediately, because there are no rules, and if it sounds good, it is good, and there are absolutely situations in which, regardless of your preference, you would rearrange this order. So what I want to do today is walk you through how to decide which is going where, and then when you might consider switching that order up. I think by the end of this video, you will have a much better understanding of how to set up a signal chain in general, whether it's on your mix bus or on your lead vocal. Now, I think where we should start is where to place EQ, because this is fundamentally the most important difference between every option that you have available when laying out your signal chain for your mix bus or your vocal chain or whatever. Because whatever comes after your EQ is going to react to the signal, to the frequency range that you have given it by your EQ choices. But to explain this a little bit better, let's say you have an EQ and then a compressor following that EQ. If you have a source that has a lot of low end and a lot of top end, but very little mid range, when that EQ is before the compressor, that compressor is then going to see and react to a signal that has a lot of low end and a lot of top end. The mid range of that instrument or of that mix bus is going to trigger the compressor way less than the low end or the top end because there's just not as much of it there. The same is true in reverse. If you have a signal, whether it's your mix bus or a vocal or whatever, that you have EQ'd to have very little low end and very little top end and lots of mid range, then the compressor is going to see and react to all of that mid-range and is going to react significantly less to the low-end content and the high-end content of that track. The compressor is going to react solely on what it is being fed. So when you EQ something first and then you send it to a compressor, that compressor is seeing a more finished sound. You've sculpted the EQ for the source to sound how you want it to sound, and now you want to compress that source that you've already sculpted for whatever, transient shaping, for vibe and character, for saturation, to reduce dynamic range, whatever you're compressing for, that's what the compressor is going to see, is that pre-EQ'd or polished and cleaned up source. Now, it's for this reason that it's significantly more common to compress after EQ. For instance, if you've got a vocal and you have a ton of low-end rumble in the vocal from the singer shuffling their feet around, there's a ton of information down at 60 hertz. There's nothing in a vocal that we ever need 60 hertz for, but that 60 hertz in that vocal from the AC or thunder outside or them shuffling their feet around or bumping into the mic stand, that's going to trigger that compressor. generally speaking, we don't want that. And so that's why it's significantly more common to clean all that stuff up with EQ and then compress after the fact. So that way, all that rumbly stuff, all that stuff that we don't even want in the vocal won't have an effect on how the compressor reacts. Now, this principle that I've just explained is the foundation for how to decide your signal chain, what should come first and last on every single source, your mix bus, your vocal chain, your drum bus, whatever. Because no matter whether we're talking about EQ or compression or de-essing or side-chained compression or saturation, or it doesn't matter what process we're talking about here, all you have to remember is that as you work your way through the chain, you hit whatever your first insert is, the second insert in the chain is going to see and react to whatever the first insert has done. And the third insert in the chain is going to see and react to what the first and second inserts have done. And the fourth insert is going to see and react to what the first, second, and third inserts have done. And every time you add another layer to these buses, every time you add an additional plugin, it's going to see and react to everything that was done before it. And this principle is the foundation for how I decide the order of my signal chain every single time. Now, my mix bus is the SPL PQ, and then it goes to the SSL Bus Plus, and then it goes to my signature pre's for saturation and color, and then it goes to either the Rupert Neve Designs MBT or the solid state Logic Fusion, and then to the SPL Big Widener. Now, there's two parts that a lot of people were really surprised by. They were very surprised that my signature pre's for saturation and color were not first, and they were really surprised that my SPL Big, the widener, was last. So let me walk you through that. I personally almost always like EQ before compression because I want the compressor to react to a finished sound, a finished frequency response, something that's already been cleaned up and something that's already been molded and sculpted to be what I want it to be. And so then the compressor is only reacting to the things that I want in the mix. So that's why EQ first, compression second for me personally. And then third is my first layer of saturation, my signature preamps. And there's two reasons why I generally like saturation after compression. One is that the compressor is sculpting the transients in the way that I like. And then I want those sculpted transients to hit saturation just the way that I like them to, because saturation is going to squash and manipulate those transients. So I personally want my compression and the shaping of those transients to happen before saturation, so that way I have more control over the shape of them. And the second reason why I put compression before my saturation on my mix bus is because the compressor is going to reduce dynamic range. It's just what compressors do. It may not be the goal, but they do that. And so that will let my saturation unit, whether it's a plug-in or my signature pre's or whatever, that will let that saturation unit see a more uniform, more even dynamic range. So it saturates more evenly. Because the wider the dynamic range of something, then the hottest parts, for instance, kick, snare, and vocal, are going to have much more saturation than the quietest parts. And I personally, when I'm setting up my chain, I want that to be in its final reduced range, so the saturation is more evenly saturating everything, not big spikes of saturation on kick and snare hits and significantly less saturation on the quietest parts or the parts in between kick and snare. I want the saturation to be as uniform and even as possible. Now from there, my mix bus goes to either the Rupert Neve Design MBT or the SSL Fusion. And these two boxes basically replaced my plug-in saturation, because I've been mixing through a set of preamps for 12, 14 years at this point. And my purpose for them was always to add color, add size, add saturation, and reduce dynamic range. This is the reason why I use them. However, as long as I've been doing that, I've also always used a plug-in saturation box, usually the black box, after the preamps in my mix bus chain. because I always wanted just a little more color, a little more saturation, a little less dynamic range. I want all that to happen just a little bit more. And the MBT or the SSL Fusion, depending on the song, replaced that plugin instance for me. And so it's just another layer of saturation. Now, both the MBT and the SSL Fusion have some other controls in them, like EQ and different saturation and widening and whatnot. Now, I don't use the widening in either of those boxes because I have the SPL Big, and it is still my favorite widening tool. But I may sculpt things just a little with a little bit more EQ, but definitely more saturation from whichever one of those I'm using. And then we move on to the SPL Big, which is the final thing in my mix bus chain, and it is widening. Why would I want my widening to happen last? It is simply because at this point, before the SPL Big, before my stereo widener, my mix or my mix bus is now done. It's done. It sounds exactly how I want everything to sound. The mix is finished, and all I want is to make it a little bit wider. And so I don't want my widening early in the chain, because then that will affect everything after it. If I widen before compression, then the compressor is going to react completely differently because it's being fed a signal that has been widened. I don't want that. I want everything to remain exactly how I have it set, just a little bit wider. And so that is why my widening is at the very end of the chain. Now, absolutely none of this is set in stone. You should experiment for yourself, and you should play around with it. Maybe you like when you put your saturation first in the chain, and so it's reacting to all the dynamic range and all the frequencies before you've sculpted anything. Maybe you want your saturation first in the chain, and then maybe you want to compress that after the fact, and then maybe you want to EQ it so that way you're only EQing a source that has already been saturated and already been compressed. And now you're sculpting the frequency response of it. There is absolutely no right or wrong with this stuff, but this is what I have settled on, and it is for very specific reasons why I have things laid out in this order. If you want to go see what I used on my mix bus and go do that, I'll put links down below. I'll also put links down below for every piece in my mix bus and all the plugins that I recommend using, and all of the videos, the dedicated videos on every piece of gear. Those links do go to Sweetwater, so anytime you guys need any piece of musical gear whatsoever, you can jump on any one of my videos and click on any one of the links in the description down below. And once you've done so, once you're on the site, you can purchase anything that you need, and when you do that, it goes a long ways to help support this channel and help me keep making content just like this, and it costs you nothing extra. So thank you guys for using those links anytime you need to purchase literally anything. And thank you, Sweetwater, for sponsoring this video. I really hope that this helped shed some light on this for you. I hope this helped you wrap your head around it, and I guess that'll do it. Thank you guys for watching. I hope this was helpful to you. We'll see you in the next one. Peace.